Just,
You are not able to share the screen?
I'm not sure how to share just a tab and not like my whole screen because then I won't see anyone.
Oh, I think you can share just a tab as well, but even then it's going to occupy all of your laptop screen. That should be okay. I will let you know if there are any questions on the chat or something, and we can have people unmute as well and just if they have any questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions since the topic is like such an interesting topic and not many people understand that. Awesome. So let's get started. First off, thank you everyone for joining me today. Our today's masterclass is on a very interesting, very talked about subject, which is tokenomics. And there are only, from my experience, there are very few people I know who can confidently say that they know this subject, even if this subject is so huge and so vast, because it's a combination of so many case studies, I think so many, some nuanced concepts of economics as well if you go more and more deep into it. But today we are just going to do like a overarching kind of understanding of how tokenomics works. For those of you who are actually attending your first ever session at the Phoenix Guild, to give a quick context, we started the Phoenix Guild at the end of Jan, and one of the things that we are doing uniquely to help more women get into Web3 is focus a lot on tasks and bounties. So there are a lot of female-led groups working towards getting more women into Web3, but we are specifically following the motto of learn by doing. So we give you your first ever task, your first ever bounty. It could be a writing task, it could be watch a video and create an infographic, or it could be even complex tasks like contribute to a development repository, right? So based on how you would like to break into Web3, of course, a part of doing those tasks is to do all of these educational sessions where you get to know about concepts and then kind of implement them in your day-to-day life, right? So Phoenix Guild is a community. We are very open, we are very collaborative, open to getting more ideas from community as to what is it that we can do and how can we help you in your Web3 learning journey. That's our prime motto. As a part of this entire helping more women gain exposure in Web3, we are doing a solidity boot camp. This is our first ever, that is Genesis Cohort. It was a 6-week program. Now it's become a 7-week because people have asked for extensions. So it's like 7 to 8 weeks program. We are covering all the basics of solidity, and now we are at the project week where people have started thinking about what are the projects that they would like to build. As a part of the bootcamp itself, to cover different domains and different topics, we are doing these sessions called master classes, where we invite expert women slash men as well from various fields to talk about their certain topics that are relatively unknown or relatively untouched upon, and also to just understand the different domains, different things that are happening in the Web3 space. One such very highly in demand masterclass that was there is on tokenomics, and I cannot be thankful enough to Romina that amongst her really busy schedule, she is able to take out an hour's time for us today to share about her learnings in this space and her experience. She is a CFO at Centrifuge. More than that, really, she is an amazing woman who she's so inspirational and has helped other women, taught them about several nitty-gritty things in this Web3 space. I learned a lot about validators and how they work thanks to a group session that we did. And having met her at ETH Denver, I'm really inspired by all the things she's doing in the Web3 space. So definitely glad to have her do a masterclass with us at the Phoenix Guild. She has a lot of expertise thinking about tokenomics. She has mentored several teams in this space. She was a mentor at ETH Denver as well to several hack teams. And I can take this whole hour to praise Romina, but I'm not going to take that spotlight. I'm just going to hand it over to her. And please, Romina, the stage is all yours.
Yeah, thanks for the very kind introduction, Kiana. I can only give that back. I think it's great that you bring so many people together and you're always so supportive and host sessions like this. And I was actually very surprised when I got to know you, how many projects you support. It's really, really inspiring to work with you and to also spend this hour together. So I've been working since 2017 in the field of blockchain. I started with security tokens and security token trading. And I consulted a few projects on the field of token economics. So I'm not an expert, but I thought about several aspects. I read a lot about it, and I'm happy to share the insights or thoughts that I've collected over the years. So now I'm trying to share my screen. I hope it works.
It should.
It doesn't work.
No?
I sent you the slides. Maybe you can.
Oh, I can also put it up.
Okay.
Let me check. Have you sent me the slides on Telegram, Romina, or
email? Sorry for this complication.
No problem.
Yeah, maybe you can mute the notifications.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know how to enable this.
No worries. I got your slides. Let me
Perfect.
open this up and I can share my screen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just let me know when you want me to advance and I can.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, let's start with the introduction slide. And also, I don't want to, just talk the whole time, but I would love to also engage with you and hear about your thoughts on token economics. And first of all, I would be interested to hear from all of you who participate. What are probably good examples of well-designed tokens that you know of? So I would invite you to use the chat feature of Zoom and take like 30 seconds to think about it. And then when I say hit enter, then you can all share your thoughts. Just like the token name or the project name is sufficient. So yeah, you can share now. Hit enter, please. Okay, two people shared. Okay. Interesting, yeah. So we have USTC, AVAX, Matic, UNI token, Loopring Mirror. Let's keep them in mind, and maybe we can also talk about it later, what we think is well-designed and not well-designed. So we definitely already see many different types of tokens and categories. So now I would propose we jump into the field of token economics. So Kiana, do you want to go over to the next slide, please? So yeah, the goal of token economics is basically that we have the opportunity to incentivize the desired behavior of the actors in our crypto economic ecosystems. So it's definitely a combination of cryptography and economics, and it all starts at the consensus level, obviously, because when we want peer-to-peer decentralized infrastructure to work without communication, we have to manage that the different actors can come to a consensus in an efficient manner, but also to prevent malicious behavior. So that's basically what was also like the key problem that the first white paper on Bitcoin that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote was actually addressing. So he was solving the Byzantine generals problem, a concept of game theory. And it's basically a coordination game. And in game theory, I think there's maybe some of you also heard the term Schelling point. It's also the name of a very important interesting conference series, which is actually about the solution people tend to choose by default, assuming we have either incentives or like some kind of rationality so that we can basically influence a bit the outcome of the behavior. So yeah, let's go over to the second slide. So here, just like the basic blockchain example is, we have different blocks and they have to be verified. And incentives in like layer 1 is basically block rewards in proof of work. So if you successfully verify the correct block, you get a reward. And if you verify a wrong block, you get slashed. So this is the general key concept, right? Like where it's really at the encryption on the cryptography layer. And the next slide shows this a bit how it's broken down for Bitcoin. So here the key goal is basically to maximize the security of the network. And this is done with like a financial reward that should always verify. And it's basically a product of all those different verifications and the hash rate and so on. So that's just one blockchain. I think we all agree that Bitcoin is a very positive example. Obviously, it doesn't solve all the problems or all the possibilities that we can work on in with distributed ledger technology. So it's one use case, and I'm also happy to give you a bit more insight on other types. Can we go over to the next slide, please? So next to the crypto economics on the consensus mechanism, token engineering is also a bit more on, how to say, like different layers, different aspects that can be designed in a token. And the token, I think it's very important to differentiate that sometimes you have infrastructure tokens or you have application tokens. So is it like an actual protocol that also uses the token as a means of payment and to, for example, distribute rewards, or if it's an application token that, for example, gives certain rights, voting power, and so on. So maybe to help you understand like this overview that you don't have to read right now, but I think it just lists the different layers that we can think about when designing tokens. So please don't read it as two columns to compare. So it's more about the rows and the classifications. And maybe you've all heard about like the key differentiator is obviously, do we have a security token or not? Like that's very important. So next to some, let's say, behavioral aspects in an ecosystem, also real world law enforcement also plays a role, and regulation or consumer protection, right? So when we design a token, it's important to have these aspects in mind, what the design will result to represent. Let's say a token that has turned on protocol fees, such as uni, could be kind of a, how do you say, like it's a profit feature, right? So it could be very close to be considered as a security token, or it could be representative for equity. So this is what we always want to have in mind, like where do we actually end up in terms of regulation and functionality. And I think we all started with ERC20, right? Like when this token type was created back in the days, it was the first category that actually allowed to program a few more features into a smart contract. And nowadays we have so many more features. I think one of the very important differentiators is fungibility. Let's say NFTs have become like a very important category, but there will also be a new category coming up, such as non-transferable tokens, as the new SBT standard that Vitalik just recently announced will have. So there are so many different use cases that we can think about why we want, for example, to have a non-transferable token. Let's think about verifying that you are a degree holder of Harvard. So we know there's a lot of fraud about those type of, let's say, not classifications, but that you have a certain reputation or you achieved a certain goal. And to prevent anyone to, how do you say, to commit a fraud in this type, you can actually verify it in a built-in a wallet, and it's not transferable. So only those that actually have received a degree can also hold those tokens, but they can't transfer it. So I think that's also a very interesting use case, but it's a kind of simple token. So this token doesn't have any other functionalities. There can also be access tokens. Let's think about token-gated communities. So what's the feature of the token? It's basically when you, let's say, it could be an NFT, you hold it, and it could give you the access right to Ashton Kutcher's podcast series. So would already solve a problem, but it's also not very complex design. When looking at a bit more, let's say, tokens that have more features, there's also the possibility that you split up certain features. Let's say you would risk to be considered a security token, then you can also come up with a dual token system where you actually split up governance rights or voting rights and the actual token as like a means of payment in the ecosystem, right? Or that's used as gas. Curve, for example, does that. They were one of the first projects to launch like this VCRV token. There are many other projects that have now governance tokens. And I think they're like, yeah, let's say also CowSwap introduced a vested or like a governance token, and how they designed it was that it was an airdrop to everyone who supported the project at the beginning and traded a lot. They also bought tokens in the token sale, and then they would, for example, receive an additional NFT if you would hold the vested cow tokens, for example. So there are different features how you can play with that. And speaking about dual tokens, there was also, for example, Terra and Luna, where that was also a dual token system. Maker, someone mentioned at the beginning Maker token, and Maker also has two different tokens. We have DAI, the stable coin, and we have Maker, which is the governance token. So they also split this up. And yeah, speaking about this example, here we can also think about collateralization, or if the token is backed by an asset, right? So that's very important for stable coins, if they're collateralized or uncollateralized, but also there's a possibility that you create asset-backed tokens that always represent like this one certain real-world asset, as we do it at Centrifuge. Our real-world assets are, for example, real estate funds or projects that we finance with the funds that we raise through the liquidity pools, or trade receivables. So there are many different invoice financing, right? Like many different examples of what could be an asset that backs your token. So it's a kind of representative token for something that has an intrinsic value. And yeah, speaking about value of tokens, next to the features of the tokens, it's also important to think about how will your token appreciate in value, and what are the economics behind that? So let's go over to the next slide. There are two different aspects that we should also consider when designing tokens, and that is, first of all, the general token supply, or like the monetary supply, where we can steer inflationary or deflationary effects. And it's basically an outcome of how many tokens do you issue at the launch of your project. Are all tokens directly minted and given out in free float or free circulation, or do you, for example, hold a certain amount of tokens in the treasury that will be released with a certain release schedule, as we see it here on the left side? There's like an exemplary release schedule. You see that in the end, it's also very well distributed, like how many tokens are like to the different token holders, that we have a kind of decentralized outcome. So it's not necessary that those different actor groups always have the equal part, but that many get it in the end, and that there's not like one small group of token holders in terms of governance, so that they can't, how do you say, take over or have a hostile takeover in terms of voting rights, or forking, right? And next to the voting power, the decentralization is also important, as you want to have very different types of token holders, maybe geographically, or if they're like not only the token holders, but also, let's say, validators that stake your tokens, that you also have that very well distributed with, let's take proof of stake as an example with the new ETH2. Here we also want to have many individual contributors, namely the validators, that will then hold those tokens, and we have users. So we need like all sides of the table to have like a certain incentive and to have a certain amount of tokens, so that it's meaningful. And also because like the token is always the point of interaction. So you also have to have enough tokens so that, let's say, you don't result in a hyperinflation, or that the price just goes down to zero. Let's look at the token release schedule. Think about Polkadot, for example, where you have parachain slots, and people have to basically bid with their dot on a parachain slot, and then the tokens get locked up. So that means a high portion of the token supply is actually locked up and not working. So it can be used as an interaction tool between the users. So the supply gets reduced, or like the circulating supply in free flow gets reduced, it's locked up. And then users get token rewards from the projects that have the parachain slots. So what happens when the projects deliver their rewards to the users? You often see a lot of price pressure on those tokens when the rewards get paid out, because monetary or financial incentives such as paying high rewards can result in wrong incentives. If someone's only there for the money, then you have the high risk that as soon as they received tokens, they also directly liquidated. We also saw that with Harmony, that had this massive ecosystem grants, and they paid everyone in Harmony tokens. So let's say in ETH Denver, they paid Deadmau5 a ridiculous high amount of Harmony tokens, and Deadmau5 directly sold the Harmony tokens. So yeah, that was definitely one of the reasons why the Harmony token was under a lot of price pressure, although the project had very good momentum and a lot of attention. So yeah, you have to be very mindful how you orchestrate different token releases, mint and burn mechanisms. Let's say you have protocol fees, and the project earns tokens that can then either be locked up in the treasury or they get burned and you reduce the supply. So actually the value of the token increases. Yeah. And let me just think about what I maybe have forgotten. I think that's all I wanted to say until now. Maybe let's hear about any thoughts or questions from your side before we jump over to the next slide in our case study. Is there anything?
Are there any questions? Does anyone have, like, you don't understand any type of tokens, or like, do you want to know more about a certain type of token? Maybe any question. Okay, I want to know, like, I always have this question, like, what are security tokens? Because the context of security tokens has evolved over such a period of time that I don't really understand the concept exactly. Like, Romina, if you can explain that.
Yeah, so security tokens, let's say it's an equity token where we do a simple fundraise, right? We want to fund our project and we want to raise capital, and instead of an actual real life share, we give our investors a token. But the token is not necessarily used in the protocol. We just use it as a cap table tool to manage our shareholders. And that simple example would be kind of a security, or let's say the number of people that get issued a token can be a security. Let's say you have, if you will distribute your token onto 20 people, then often you don't have to issue a prospectus, right? But if you issue the token to 100,000 people, the regulator would ask you to provide a prospectus to inform all those buyers of your securities and to help them understand the risk of the project. It's basically a term, possibility for consumer protection, right? I think there are also questions in the chat. Let me quickly look at them. Gianna, did this address your question, or do you?
Yeah, I think I'm good. I also see a couple of questions on the chat. Some of them could be interesting.
So yeah, one is about validator and geographical distribution, and what are different types of tokens. I think different types of tokens we have, we had like one slide before that. We can also name them, right? Like I think I listed a few of them. When you look at this table and you go from one row to another, you would then say, okay, token type is an NFT, it's a non-fungible token, or it's a let's say in the row of rights, if this token gives you the voting rights, it's classified as a governance token. And if it's just a means of payment, let's say, a stable coin, right? Like that would be a payment token. So yeah, where like it doesn't have other utilities. So we always think about the utilities of our tokens, and then yeah, that basically can create, how do you say, add to the different where it's going to be categorized. Can you go over the difference between application and infrastructure token? Yeah, application token, let's say, you build a project on Ethereum. So you have your layer one, it's clear where you want to build this. And then you build a D app, and that gets a token so that people can interact with the protocol or like the app that you've built. So it could be an access token, right? And so that you can use this D app, you need to hold the token. But it could also be that you have a D app that's built on Ethereum for gig working, and you always have to submit, like, let's say, an assignment, and then you get tokens as rewards paid out. So it would also be kind of a like more on the application side, not on the infrastructure side. So yeah, that's where they differ. If it's about the actual consensus layer or if it's built on top. And there's also another question. As an investor, how do you go about building a token calendar and release schedule for your unvested tokens? But so I have to ask again about the, like, what do you mean exactly? Because as an investor, you can't really engineer the release schedule, right? Because that lies with the project. So maybe the person that asks this, maybe you want to turn on your mic and help explain better what you were aiming at.
Yeah. Sanchi.
Hello. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Hey,
Hi.
so hi. So thanks a lot, first of all, for taking out the time to speak to us. So I just wanted to ask, for example, as an investor, we have multiple token rights, right? We are going to be getting a lot of tokens when they get released. So how do you internally track that? Basically, how do you build a tracking mechanism for those tokens?
Yeah, so I mean, usually token release schedules for tokens, if they are subject to a vesting or lockup, they are built in the smart contract, or yeah, in the program or the tool that the project uses. But there are the inputs are known, right? Like what's the transferability? How long do you have other tokens locked up? Or it's mostly a regular scheme. So you can just create an Excel sheet, right? To model if you get 50 tokens in month one and 50 in month two, or if it's a 3-month payout and they are locked up. So you basically come up with like a, yeah, longer table that would then model how much of the tokens you would receive and that you can transfer after a certain time. So that's how you usually track it.
Got it. And are there any variables that we can account for there?
Are there what? Sorry, can you
any
repeat
variables that we can account for in this schedule?
Depends. So like the examples that I know of don't have further variables than the general lockup or vesting.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks a lot. That's
There was
very
also one more, and that was from Surabi. How do you create liquidity for your tokens? I think that's a very good question. Because if we want our token to appreciate in price, we basically have to increase the demand. And that can be because our project is super exciting and many people hear about it, either from word of mouth or from the news. And just like the demand naturally evolves, but also liquidity also needs like you have to ensure that there are always two counterparties that are interested to make a trade with each other. So you can work with market makers that always take like the tokens or their own book, and they basically every time someone makes a bid or an ask, that they take it on their book. There are several ones, big ones like Wintermute or Jump, very big market makers, but there are also bonding curves and liquidity pool provider, where you basically just can set up your own liquidity pool for your token, and then you say, okay, like it's my native token, and I want to create a liquid market against Bitcoin or against Ethereum, and then you can use tools like Uniswap or Banker, or there are a few that provide those type of services. But to have this kind of liquidity pool, you have to ensure that there's always a certain critical amount of liquidity in those pools. And you have to find those token holders that are willing to, to commit to leave their liquidity in these pools. So they would often get a certain return for it. Maybe it's a good transition to our case study, Terra. So we can now think about Terra. And here I actually also wanted to invite you to share some thoughts first before we jump into it. What do you think were some flaws in the token economics of Terra? Maybe you can take 30 seconds again, and then when I say please press enter, you can share what you are able to write in the chat field. Okay. I hope you all have something to share. So please press enter. Okay, so the fact that it was an algorithmic stablecoin, that it was not really decentralized or externally managed. Bitcoin reserves. Okay, a few opinions already. That's great. If you can press enter, Gianna, then it will show my text for the case study. So maybe let's start with the fact that it was an algorithmic stablecoin. And important here to mention is that algorithmic stablecoins can also be considered as uncollateralized stablecoins. So this is the key feature. And this is what we have to be aware of when we touch tokens or stablecoins if they are not collateralized, right? The price will fluctuate much more as if you would have an asset as a collateral that has a quite stable value. So there are some algorithmic stablecoins that try to create a basket of cryptocurrencies. So this is obviously super complex to ensure like a stable peg. But even if you collateralize your stablecoin with another cryptocurrency that is not like a basket, you can still have high fluctuations. So another example to like for a stablecoin that would be collateralized would be, for example, Maker and USDC, where there we would differentiate that USDC is centralized and Maker is very decentralized, right? And yeah, this whole motivation behind algorithmic stablecoins is basically to come up with more capital efficient, stable currencies for the ecosystem. And I think there's one fundamental problem here that we already saw also in the subprime mortgage crisis. It is that there is the law of one price. Let's say I have a euro coin, it will always be worth €1, even if you paint it or you change it, it should always have the same price. So why should someone else pay me 50 cents or €2 if the euro is very clearly €1 worth? So we had it with asset-backed securities where the risk was basically miscalculated and the premium was not correct. And here, yeah, with algorithmic stablecoins such as Terra is also that you create like a stablecoin that needs less Bitcoin or less of another asset for its peg. So for example, Maker is over collateralized, so it always has more ETH behind it than the DAI that you lend. But if you try to not put $2, right, for the $1 that you get back and lock it in, but you try to manage that with 20 cents to get $1, it's completely flawed. So I think that was quite evident. And then in terms of decentralization and consensus, it was using delegated proof of stake, which is interesting for validators because you get higher rewards, because if many other validators or voters in the system delegate their rights to you and you get more rewards, that's really interesting from the validator perspective. But for the project, it actually results in very few people making the key decisions for the project. And here it was also basically the problem that those delegates that got all the power basically were most likely also the same that were taking decisions for how to maintain the peg and when to sell or buy Bitcoin. So it's a very concentrated risk and exactly the opposite of what we usually want to, the outcome we want to have in a truly decentralized distributed ledger technology. Yeah, I already mentioned it was a dual token system, and here we had this on-chain mint and burn mechanics. So that's how they designed it here, and that's also where basically the whole system was blown up, right? That you had this price pressure on both tokens at the same time that was artificially created. So that's why with all these risk scenarios and simulations that I think, yeah, maybe many of us have seen that they were shared in crypto Twitter. How can Harvard researchers not see it? And I think it's not really like a black swan event because it was an attack, but it wasn't modeled that you would have these extreme scenarios at the same time. So that's basically when it can collapse. And speaking about rewards and liquidity pools and lending, Terra was basically using Anchor protocol where you would lock up your Terra, your UST, and you got always very high APYs that were never adjusted. So they were always over 20%. At the end, they were very high over 40%, and they went up and up because when people try to liquidate, like unlock their UST that they give to this lending or liquidity pool, and they wanted back to actually liquidate it in the market, right? You then have this fire sale in this pool that then has an effect also on the price pressure, and you have to basically sell some of the collateral to maintain the price. And then if your price is correlated to the actual collateral, you have this downward spiral, as we saw with the Bitcoin, UST, and Luna. So that's a bit how I would summarize it. Here, I didn't want to describe the attack because I think that's a bit more journalistic work and yeah, a very broad topic on its own, but just like some examples where the project received already some criticism. Yeah. Do we have more questions or comments? Someone who wants to share maybe a project that you're working on and what you're currently trying to, challenges you're trying to solve?
Yeah, anyone who wants to maybe describe their tokenomics or just is thinking about it. You also have like 14 minutes of Romina's time to get quick feedback if you want to share anything.
Hi, I'm Surbhi. Can I ask a question? Is it okay?
Yeah, sure. Right,
Okay, thanks, Kyan, and thank you so much, Romina, for this wonderful presentation. Clarity of thought is amazing. Thank you so much. I just had one question on when you talked about liquidity question, right? When you were describing liquidity. So when you start a project, right, when you launch it, usually what is the right time to launch a token, number one? And secondly, when you start a project, how do you create and get that initial pool of liquidity? I hope I was clear.
Yeah, so you asked what's a good time to launch your token, right?
Yeah, and initial, what is the first source of liquidity? Because you will need to have some TVL, right? So how do you get that first source? You have to do it yourself, or you have to get your investors to do it? So just that question.
Yeah, so I think it depends on what your project is about. So TVLs is usually where you have some kind of lock mechanics or like a liquidity pool, but not every token has a TVL. And you also don't need the liquidity right from the start. So I think as soon as you want to go live, you should, like if you might then want to mint your token, right? So when should the Genesis event happen? Some projects also design the token on this allocation level when they start working, but they haven't built the technology yet, right? The project is not live, but you raise funds, and instead of selling a future, like a contract for the future token to be minted, you can also say, okay, we directly sell the token, we mint it, we have our treasury, and we distribute it to the first investors or the first partners, right? You can also, give certain counterparties that you think are valuable for your ecosystem, a certain allocation. It doesn't always have to be, community or ecosystem can be very broad. So it can be useful to distribute tokens before your project goes live, but I think it's always dependent on your project type. So what project are you working on? Maybe that's also more helpful to know. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, here we also have a question from Teresa. She asked, what is the best way of maintaining price stability? Is a buyback and mint and burn strategy the best one? So buyback, is that something different than mint and burn, but it's basically reducing the token in circulation, right? Like this one level where you can basically steer a bit the demand and the supply. Buybacks require capital. Let's say if you have many tokens outstanding and you want to reduce a certain amount, you would have to buy it in the market. That could have the effect that the price goes up, but then your project needs to have this capital. So if your project actually needs the capital to build the project, it wouldn't be a suitable activity. So yeah, you could also manage your supply then with a mint and burn, where let's say your protocol harvests fees from the transactions that are done through your protocol or with your tokens. then that's a better way of reducing the tokens in circulation.
There's one more, Romina, around what is a good amount of tokens to be launched at the token genesis, depending on different types of projects?
Oh yeah, I think that's a very broad one. The question is how many users or interactions, right, does your project need? Do you have a trading protocol, or what does the token do, right? So it depends totally on the utility or the features of the token. If it's access tokens, then you could also start with, let's say, there are only 100 tokens because, let's say, you want to give token holders access to Berghain, like a very popular club. So you want to make it super exclusive, right? Then you only want to have 100 and you don't need a billion. So yeah, maybe just as an example where those numbers would be very different. I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
I would have a question, sorry, regarding the last slide, and thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. You mentioned that UST and Luna is a dual token system. Would you say that these kind of systems where the stablecoin is backed by just the other, like native coin, is in general a bad idea, or can this sort of stablecoin issuance work?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a successful example yet, but that's basically what we described with algorithmic in the relationship with Luna and UST. You basically had, like, if the one token was under price pressure, the other one was minted or burned, right? So it's not a simple calculation. You can't steer it because you don't have only one central marketplace. If you have one central marketplace, maybe that works. But we saw in the example now that there were very different marketplaces used to create pressure on more than two assets, right? Because it was also packed, you tried to pack also or stabilize it with a collateral of Bitcoin that was behind it. So that's, I think, where the flaws of algorithmic stablecoins become quite evident, that here you have those events where it's not a simple function. That's why I would rather hold a collateralized, decentralized stablecoin such as DAI than, let's say, Tether, where you also don't know how well collateralized and redeemable the underlying funds are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and then I have a hard cut. Yeah, you wanted to say something, please.
Oh no, there's just this one question on what is the difference between UST and Luna?
So yeah, UST is the stable coin, whereas Luna was basically the project token, right? They, like, one was the stable coin and the other one was rather like the utility token of and governance token of the project.
And Romina, I don't know if you addressed this, maybe I missed it. Could you talk about how tokens achieve good distribution in terms of validators geographically?
Yeah. So I think it's important that protocols don't only get their nodes set up in data centers, and especially using data center providers such as AWS or DigitalOcean. They are very convenient for node operators or validators to use because you don't have to have a physical device, but it has a kind of cluster risk. Let's say in the event of a war, AWS data centers can be easy targets, right? So you have like the physical distribution is not very high, although you have many validators in the network. But geographically, yeah, you want to ensure that you have many individual node operators that have their nodes in their own households. And obviously, like those devices and also the stake that you might need for them are very high investments. And we know that all over the world, we have different prices. So someone in the US, it's much more affordable to set up a node for a blockchain, where someone, let's say in India, the price is significantly higher to get those devices shipped. So I think when launching projects, incentive programs for validators are important. And I think not only providing them free funds to stake, because that's a bit flawed, because we all know there's no free lunch, right? So they have to have a very high intrinsic motivation. So only, yeah, handing out helicopter money doesn't successfully ensure that you have many highly decentralized validators. But there could also be that you work with different service providers, infrastructure providers that help set up nodes and have incentive systems with them where they facilitate the onboarding for new validators, the educational part behind it, because at the beginning of a project, the documentation might be quite poor, or you have so many different combinations of clients and devices, cloud setup versus device-based setup, where the documentation has to grow. So I think that's where a project can steer it very well, how quickly they onboard new users, educate them, and stay in contact with the community is probably a good result. Yeah. Okay.
I have 2 more minutes, so maybe there is one interesting question by Sylvia. Which stablecoin is more reliable in your personal opinion with regards to its tokenomics?
Yeah, I think for stablecoins, the main feature we want, the two components that are the most important, from my perspective, is collateralization and decentralization. Yeah, so that's how I would look at the topic. So if there's like some kind of algorithm involved, doesn't disqualify a stablecoin from being a good or useful one, but I think a very high collateralization rate is the key. And maybe with real world assets. So doesn't have to be 100% real world asset backed, but there should be some kind of stability. Yeah. And also not only be coupled to only one single currency. When we basically want to create stable coins for the blockchain world, we often have the motivation to get independent from our local governments, regulators, central bank, and their monetary policy. So it doesn't, it wouldn't address the problem fully to then be completely exposed to the US dollar and its inflation, right? So yeah, maybe you want to hold like a mix of different assets to create a stable value. But that's, yes, different from denomination, because the denomination is often in US dollar, like in the crypto world, but that doesn't have to mean that it's always like 100% backed by US dollars, right? When we look at stable coins. Just the last remark to that. And now I have to jump, but it was really, really nice.
No worries. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks a lot for your time, Romina. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope we can share the slides, and perhaps I can share it later in the Phoenix Field Telegram group as well. And if you have any questions, Romina has recently joined our group. If you have any interesting comments or anything you're working on, you can definitely share. And whenever she is able to take out some time, maybe she can take a look and respond.
Okay, then happy weekend, everyone.
Yeah, happy